Hello, everyone. Welcome back to today's story. In this episode, we follow Jack through the fourth day of a nightmare that shows no sign of ending. What begins as anxious searching and fragile hope slowly sinks into exhaustion as Lytutien and baby Anna remain missing without a trace. With every unanswered phone call and every dead end along empty roads and quiet villages, Jack is forced to confront a fear no parent or partner should ever face. As time slips away, determination replaces denial, and Jack realizes he can no longer search alone. Stay until the end to witness how desperation, love, and resolve collide when everything that matters is suddenly gone. And don't forget to subscribe to help us reach 10,000 subscribers. Your support truly means the world to us. 3 full days had passed since Lytutien and baby Anna disappeared without leaving behind a single clear trace. At the beginning, Jack forced himself to stay calm. Panic, he told himself, would only make things worse. Lytutien had just given birth. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and emotionally fragile. It wasn't unusual for new mothers to need space or quiet. Maybe she had gone to stay somewhere peaceful for a night or two. Maybe her phone battery died. Maybe the signal was bad. Each excuse sounded reasonable during the first few hours, but hours turned into a full day. Then another. By the third morning, every excuse collapsed under the weight of silence. Jack hadn't slept properly since the moment he realized something was truly wrong. His eyes burned, his head ached constantly, and his body moved on pure instinct. Eat, walk, ask, call, repeat. If he stopped moving, his thoughts would drown him. The late year wind swept across the rural road as Jack trudged forward, dust clinging to his shoes and the hem of his jacket. The jacket itself had been worn day and night, smelling faintly of sweat and cold air. His face looked hollow, cheeks sunken, eyes red and unfocused. Anyone who looked at him closely could tell he hadn't rested in days. In his right hand, Jack held a small photograph, creased, bent, and soft at the edges from being folded and unfolded countless times. The image showed Lytutien sitting on the edge of their bed, holding baby Anna against her chest. The baby was wrapped in a pale blanket, her tiny face half hidden, her mouth slightly open in sleep. Jack remembered that moment clearly. Lytutien had smiled tiredly and whispered, "She finally fell asleep." Jack had joked that Anna was already controlling their lives. Lytutien laughed softly, careful not to wake the baby. That sound, gentle, warm, familiar, now echoed painfully in Jack's mind. He reached the outskirts of a nearly deserted roadside market. The place felt lifeless. Most vendors had already packed up, leaving behind empty wooden tables and scattered leaves. Weak sunlight filtered through bare branches, casting long shadows across the dirt ground. Jack stopped at the first stall he saw. "Excuse me," he said quietly, holding out the photo with both hands. "Have you seen this woman?" She was carrying a newborn baby. The woman selling vegetables leaned forward, studying the image carefully. Her expression softened with sympathy. After a few seconds, she shook her head. "No, I'm sorry. I would remember a baby that young." Jack nodded, forcing out a thank you, and stepped away. He moved from stall to stall, repeating the same question, showing the same photo. An elderly man selling dried roots squinted at the image, but shook his head. A middle-aged woman packing baskets apologized and said she hadn't seen anyone like that. Two young men standing near the market gate glanced at the photo briefly and shrugged. Every answer felt like a small blow to Jack's chest. The wind grew stronger, lifting dry leaves that scraped along the road. The sound followed him like whispers, feeding the fear crawling under his skin. Jack pulled out his phone again, staring at Lytutien's name on the screen. He hesitated for a second. Then he called. 1 ring, 2 rings, then the automated voice. "The subscriber you are calling is unavailable." Jack lowered the phone slowly, his fingers numb. He stared at the dark screen, as if it might suddenly light up on its own. 3 days, 72 hours without a single message, a single missed call, a single sign. Fear no longer came in sharp waves. It was quieter now, heavier. It settled deep inside him and refused to leave. "Jack?" The voice startled him. He turned sharply and saw his mother standing a short distance away, her scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. Her face looked pale, lined with exhaustion. She had been searching too, walking from village to village, calling distant relatives, asking neighbors, anyone who might have seen a young woman with a newborn. She hadn't slept much either. "Anything?" she asked softly. Jack shook his head. "Nothing. No one here has seen her?" She sighed, nodding slowly, as if she had expected no other answer. "I spoke to a woman near the rice fields earlier," she said. "She thought she saw someone carrying a baby 2 days ago, but she wasn't sure." 2 days ago, Jack repeated under his breath. Every lead they found was already old. Time felt like sand slipping through his fingers. They stood there for a moment, surrounded by empty stalls and cold air. Jack stared down the road, his eyes searching the distance, as if sheer will might force Tien and Anna to appear. "We should try the riverside path again," his mother suggested carefully. "Some people avoid the main road." Jack nodded immediately. Any direction was better than standing still. Standing still made his thoughts too loud. They walked together toward the river, their steps slow but determined. Neither of them spoke much. Words felt useless now. Everything important had already been said, and none of it had changed reality. Jack's thoughts drifted back to the morning Tien disappeared. She had looked exhausted, her hair loosely tied, dark circles under her eyes. Still, she smiled when Jack asked if she was okay. She said she just needed a bit of fresh air, maybe a short walk. She kissed Anna's forehead and promised she wouldn't be long. "I'll be back soon," she had said. Soon had turned into 3 endless days. They reached the river by mid-morning. The water flowed steadily, calm and indifferent to their fear. A fisherman stood nearby, crouched over his net. Jack approached him quickly, heart pounding. "Sir," he said, holding up the photo. "Have you seen her?" The fisherman studied the image carefully, his brow furrowing. "I think I saw someone similar," he said slowly. Jack's breath caught. "When?" 2 mornings ago," the man replied. "She passed here early." "With a baby?" Jack asked, barely breathing. The fisherman hesitated. "I don't remember a baby. She was walking fast, like she was in a hurry." Jack's stomach tightened. The answer wasn't comforting, but it was something. Proof that Tien might have been alive, moving, not trapped somewhere unseen. "Which way did she go?" Jack asked. The fisherman pointed upstream, toward a dirt junction surrounded by old trees. Jack thanked him repeatedly, his voice tight. He turned to his mother, hope and fear colliding in his eyes. They followed the path, but the further they walked, the emptier it became. No familiar faces, no clear footprints. The trail faded into nothing. By late afternoon, exhaustion dragged heavily at their bodies. The cold seeped into their bones. When they finally returned home, both of them felt drained beyond words. The house felt wrong, too quiet, too empty. No soft crying from Anna, no gentle humming from Lytutien as she paced the room with the baby in her arms. Jack collapsed onto the sofa, staring blankly at the ceiling. His chest felt tight, as if he couldn't breathe properly. "She's been gone too long," he said suddenly, his voice cracking. What if something happened to Anna? His mother sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was calm, controlled. "Don't think like that," she said. Lytutien wouldn't let anything happen to her. Jack rubbed his face, eyes burning. "Then why hasn't she contacted us? Why can't anyone find them?" She had no answer. She poured him a glass of warm milk, urging him to drink. He did so mechanically, barely tasting it. Minutes later, his body finally gave in. Exhaustion pulled him into a restless sleep filled with fragmented dreams. Empty roads, unanswered calls, Lytutien walking away with Anna just out of reach. His mother remained awake. She sat alone in the dim light, staring toward the window. Her expression stayed composed, but beneath it, worry twisted painfully. 3 days had already passed, and somewhere out there, beyond their reach, Lytutien and baby Anna were still missing. The fourth morning arrived without relief. Jack woke before sunrise, his body stiff from sleeping upright on the sofa. For a moment, just a moment, he forgot. Then reality crashed back in. The silence, the empty crib, the phone still dark beside him. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face. His head throbbed, and his throat felt dry, as if he hadn't spoken in days. Outside, the sky was a dull gray, promising another cold day. Jack listened carefully, irrationally hoping to hear Anna's faint cry from the next room. Nothing. His mother was already awake. She stood at the kitchen table, sorting through a notebook filled with names, phone numbers, and scribbled notes. People they had contacted, places they had visited, rumors they had heard. Her movements were steady, almost methodical. But Jack noticed how often she paused, staring at the paper without really seeing it. "We can't search the same places again," Jack said quietly. "We need new ground." She nodded. "I was thinking the same thing." They sat down together, spreading the notebook between them. Over the past 3 days, they had learned how quickly hope could rise and how brutally it could fall. Someone would claim they saw a woman with a baby. Another would say it might have been days ago. Every lead faded under scrutiny. Still, Jack refused to stop. "I'll go farther today," he said, "past the junction, into the smaller villages." His mother looked up sharply. "Alone?" "You can't walk that far," he said gently. "I'll keep calling. If anything comes up here, let me know." She hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful." Jack grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. The cold air cut through him instantly, but he welcomed the sting. It kept him awake, focused. The road stretched endlessly ahead, narrow and uneven. Jack walked fast, his thoughts racing. He replayed every possible scenario in his mind. If Lytutien had gone willingly, why hadn't she contacted anyone? If something had happened, why hadn't anyone seen or heard anything? And Anna. That was the thought he tried hardest to avoid. A newborn, barely 2 months old, completely dependent. The idea that she might be cold, hungry, or crying somewhere without help made Jack's chest tighten painfully. He reached the first small village by mid-morning. Fewer houses, fewer people. He approached anyone he saw. An old man feeding chickens, a woman sweeping her yard, a teenager leaning against a fence. The routine repeated itself. "Have you seen this woman?" They looked. They shook their heads. Some offered sympathy. Others looked away, uncomfortable. By noon, Jack's legs felt heavy. His stomach growled, but he ignored it. Eating felt unnecessary. Searching was all that mattered. Near the edge of the village, he noticed a small roadside shop. The owner, a middle-aged woman, watched him approach. Jack showed her the photo. "Please," he said, his voice rough. "Have you seen her? She was with a baby." The woman frowned, studying the image longer than most. "I didn't see her," she said slowly. "But 3 days ago, a stranger stopped here asking for directions." Jack's heart jumped. "What kind of stranger?" "A woman," she said. "Older than her. Nervous, she asked about shortcuts to the next district." Jack's pulse quickened. "Did she have a baby?" "No," the woman replied. "She was alone." The answer felt like both hope and dread tangled together. "Do you remember which direction she went?" The woman pointed down a narrow dirt path, leading away from the main road. "That way." Jack thanked her and immediately followed the path. It twisted between overgrown bushes and uneven ground. His breath grew shallow as he walked, scanning everything around him. But the path led nowhere useful. By late afternoon, exhaustion pressed down hard. Jack leaned against a tree, forcing himself to breathe slowly. His phone buzzed suddenly in his hand. His mother. "Jack," she said urgently. "Someone just called me. A man from the neighboring district. He heard we're looking for a woman with a baby." Jack straightened instantly. "What did he say?" "He thinks he might have seen her 3 days ago near the old storage buildings," she replied. "He wasn't sure before, but after seeing the photo—" "I'm on my way," Jack said, already moving. The storage building sat abandoned at the edge of the district, remnants of a project that had failed years ago. Rusted metal doors, cracked concrete, overgrown weeds. Jack's heart pounded as he approached. The place felt wrong. Too quiet, too isolated. He searched every corner, calling Lytuten's name, despite knowing she couldn't hear him. Dust filled the air. The buildings were empty. Nothing. By the time he returned home, the sky had darkened completely. Jack's body felt like it might collapse at any moment, but his mind refused to slow down. Inside, his mother sat at the table, her hands folded tightly. "No sign," Jack said hoarsely. She nodded, eyes glistening but dry. "I know." They sat in silence for a long time. The clock ticked loudly, marking each second that passed without Tien and Anna. Finally, Jack spoke. "We need help. More people. We can't do this alone anymore." His mother looked at him carefully. "You're right." That night, Jack barely slept. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound outside. A passing motorbike, a barking dog. Each noise made his heart race. Somewhere, somehow, Tien and Anna were still out there. And Jack promised himself, no matter how long it took, no matter how far he had to go, he would not stop searching. Not until he found them.